In the quiet stillness of dawn, when shadows cling to the ground like secrets waiting to be told, a peculiar scene unfolded on the edge of Martin's sprawling farm. Thin beams of light danced on the demisted grass, illuminating a scene that would be as perplexing as it was troubling. There, in the soft morning haze, a group of men crept onto the land, their movements synchronized, almost choreographed. They moved in slow, deliberate steps, the kind not born from urgency but from a calculated calm. At first glance, they looked like ordinary labor's work boots caked with mud, weathered hands ready for toil. But something in their gaze hinted at a deeper intent, a subtle malice that prickled at the back of the neck. They darted glances over their shoulders, ensuring no one was watching as they inched closer to the heart of the farm. The air was thick with anticipation, a whisper of tension swirling like the morning fog. And what of Martin, the farmer? He stood at the edge of his field, that honest face framed by the early sun, framed by his worn straw hat and the carving lines of years spent under the open sky. He had seen many things in his lifetime: a wild storm ravaging crops, the joyful laughter of children chasing fireflies, and the quiet moments watching the seasons change. But this felt different. The creeping men settled on his land without a single flinch from him, as though they were mere shadows against the backdrop of his steadfast resolve. As the men moved, Martin simply observed, his eyes narrowing with a slow, simmering intensity. They stopped at the edge of his neighbor's field under the old oak tree that had stood for generations and began to dig. With a skillful finesse that spoke of practice, they worked the earth with shovels, each thrust pounding like a heartbeat in the silence. The distance between them and Martin pulsed with unspoken tension. He could feel it in the marrow of his bones. Why was he so calm? The answer lay buried deep within him, in scars from the past and wisdom earned through years of weathering storms both literal and figurative. He had faced squatters before, those looking to take advantage of a good piece of land, and he'd learned the hard way that showing fear only emboldens them. It was a lesson hard won, one that grounded him like the roots of the very crops he nurtured. The men continued their task, unaware that their actions had not gone undetected. Martin's presence seemed to cast an unbreakable aura around his land. He watched, muscles coiled like springs, each second stretching out like a long, dangerous thread, and yet he did not move. He stood transfixed, a guardian of his domain. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that wove through the grass like fingers digging deeper into the earth. Just when it seemed the minutes would stretch into hours, one of the men came to a standstill. He dug his shovel deep and let out a frustrated cry. Clearly, they hadn't found what they were hoping for. And then, as if sensing his moment, Martin tilted his head slightly, almost imperceptibly, revealing a hint of defiance in the corner of his mouth. The men exchanged nervous glances, the tension spiraling around them like a storm cloud. A flicker of doubt passed through them, and yet still they pressed on, but not without hesitation. They were clearly rattled. This wasn't just any piece of land. This was Martin's land, and the very ground seemed to resist their intrusion. The roots of the ancient oak twisted and turned beneath them, whispering stories of resilience and defense, echoing the spirit of the man who watched. For Martin, the stakes of this confrontation weren't just about land. They reached down into something deeper. They threatened the sanctuary he and his family had built, the legacy passed from generation to generation. So he stood, muscles taut, calculating how to adapt, how to confront this sneaky incursion without moving a single step. He waited, each tick of the clock adding weight to the gathering storm. Then came a soft voice, one surprisingly calm amidst the brewing tension. A child's voice, bubbling with the innocence of youth, echoed from behind. The twins, Lucy and Jacob, whom he had raised to love the land as fiercely as he did, had wandered out, the sunrise kicking golden dust up around their small feet. They squinted towards the men, their curiously innocent gazes locking onto the intruders with fascination. Lucy asked, her voice ringing clear through the thick air, cutting through the tension like the sharp edge of a blade. Martin felt a flicker of panic ignite in his chest. He glanced at his children, worries slashing through him like icy wind, but the boys had unwittingly rallied the hero that dwelled within him. It was no longer just his land they threatened, it was his children's safe place, a sanctuary woven with laughter and nourishment. And suddenly, the ground he stood on held more weight than ever. The intruders shifted uncomfortably, their determination faltering. They met Martin's formidable gaze, unsettling in its unwavering calm. There was something impossibly defiant about his inability to flinch. They thought they could take what didn't belong to them, but they underestimated his steady fortitude. One of the men, a burly figure with a rough beard and an edge to his eyes, tried to rally his brothers in arms. "Look, buddy, this doesn't concern you. We're only looking for minerals." The words dripped thick with insincerity, each syllable landing like a stone thrown into a pond. Martin swallowed, the warmth of the sun pressing down against his skin. "You're not digging for minerals, you're trespassing," he responded, voice low and steady, each word a hammer ringing with authority. A strangled silence engulfed the scene as the air thickened with the unsaid. The men shifted, glancing at one another, but still they didn't leave. It was as though a spell had tied them to the earth, each of them weathering their own battle of wills against the man who stood before them. Martin felt his children draw closer, their small bodies grounding him, filling him with strength he hadn't known he possessed. In their eyes, he read a fierce trust, an unwavering belief that their father would protect their world. Suddenly, the stakes surged even higher. The farm wasn't just a patch of land. It was home, a realm of memories laden with laughter, hardships, and the sweet scent of apple pie cooling on the windowsill. He lifted his chin, allowing an air of quiet authority to envelop him. "If you continue to dig, you'll have a lot more to worry about than minerals," he said, each word unwavering, echoing through the stillness. The threat hung in the air, taut and heavy. It wasn't just an empty statement, he meant every word. And yet, during that moment of doubt, the thing that struck the men the hardest was the stark confidence in Martin's stance. It was an iron wall set against the tempest of their greed, and they faltered where they thought they had strength. The long-held silence began to crack like thin ice beneath heavy boots. "What's he gonna do? He's just one dude," one of the men dared to mutter, but his voice lacked conviction. The bravado had suffocated, the fire in their eyes dimming as they weighed their options against Martin's impenetrable presence. Through the thick air, Martin caught a glimpse of the whispers threading through the men, revealing their doubt that festered and grew like weeds invading a well-tended garden. A sense of victory brewed within him. It was everything he had hoped for, every past struggle flooding his heart, feeding the fierce resolve that would not bend. They had dug their fate with their own hands. One of them took a tentative step backward, then another, and without further words, the lingering tension shattered like glass. They dropped their shovels, a clattering sound that echoed like a final curtain falling on a show long past its prime. Suddenly, the men were retreating, melting away from the farm like shadows chased off by the rising sun. As they vanished into the distance, Martin exhaled, the tightness in his chest uncoiling with each breath. His children looked up at him, their eyes sparkling with pride and relief. "You stood tall, Daddy," Jacob whispered, stepping forward, his small hand reaching to grasp Martin's calloused fingers. "Blood doesn't make a family. It's love, heart, and standing firm together," Martin replied gently, embracing his twins and lifting their spirits as they reveled in this moment, a testament that against adversity and deceit they had emerged victorious. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the farm with a golden hue, the weight of the encounter slowly sank into Martin's bones. Yes, they may have moved in slow but sure, but in that moment, he learned that sometimes strength isn't measured by how fast you take action, but by how firmly you stand your ground, unyielding to what threatens your sanctuary. The generations before him whispered truths that rippled within him, echoes of courage blooming in the small swells of a quiet heart. And with each passing day, Martin knew that the lessons of patience and steadfastness he had chosen to embody would bloom, just as the crops in the fields would return each spring, a promise renewed, nourished by the roots of resilience. The morning fog hung thick over Martin's farm, wrapping around the fields like a silent predator stalking its prey. The sun was just rising, casting a soft golden hue across the dew-kissed grass. But amid this serene beauty, something sinister was stirring just beyond the tree line. A group of 5 men moved carefully, their footsteps barely disturbing the thick carpet of leaves. They were sneaky calculating, their intentions hidden beneath the facade of casual laborers. As the men inched closer, they shrouded themselves in the mist, their bodies cloaked in earthy tones that blended seamlessly with the landscape. It was a scene that would make the unwary observer feel oddly at ease. After all, what harm could a few men working the land possibly bring? But Martin had learned to read the stories hidden within the silence, to see past the ordinary. Standing at the fence line, Martin surveyed the scene, his weathered hands resting on the splintered wood. He was a man of the land, shaped by years of labor under the sun and storms, and something about these men set his instincts ablaze. Their movements were too calculated, too smooth for the honest work of farmers. A chill ran down his spine, a warning that whispered through his bones, danger was creeping in. He pulled on his straw hat, the familiar weight settling on his head like a shield. Martin didn't flinch. Instead, he remained rooted, taking in the bizarre spectacle. He had seen things in his life that would make the strongest man tremble. Droughts that withered crops to dust, floods that swallowed fences whole, and illnesses that stripped away livestock. But these men, they posed a different kind of threat, one that echoed with the darkness he had faced before. With each measured step they took, faces drawn tight in concentration, Martin could almost feel their unease. They were digging something up, or more accurately trying to. What could they possibly want from the land he cherished? The air was thick with tension as they continued, digging slowly, as if they were afraid of what they might uncover. Their whispers were muted, muffled by the distance, but Martin could see the furtive glances exchanged among them, the way they communicated without words. Moments stretched into what felt like hours. Sweat began to bead on Martin's forehead as he began to debate his next move. He thought, each option churned in his gut. Instinct told him to step forward to demand an explanation. But wisdom, forged in the crucible of past experiences, urged him to stay put, to watch and learn. Then, just as he was about to turn and get his phone perhaps to call the authorities, a shift occurred in the group. One of the men, stocky and broad-shouldered, leaned in and whispered something to the others. Their demeanor shifted, growing more agitated, eyes darting nervously. Martin's heart raced. Fear had twisted their intentions. Whatever they sought, it must be monumental to cause such anxiety. Suddenly, there was a loud crash as one of them struck something hard beneath the soil. Panic rippled through the group like a wave. The man, wide-eyed, took a step back, his shovel clattering to the ground. He whispered, a tremble in his voice. The others crowded around, peering into the hole with a blend of dread and curiosity. Martin felt his body tense up, the adrenaline coursing through him, igniting a fire within. They had crossed a line. They had no rights here. This wasn't just land. It was his legacy, the soil where his family had toiled for generations. This was a sacred place filled with stories, laughter, and tears. He took a slow, deep breath. It was time to assert himself, to draw a line in the sand. With renewed resolve, he stepped from the shadows of the trees, moving deliberately toward the men. Each footfall echoed with the size of his spirit, a commitment to protect what was rightfully his. His voice crackled through the pureness of dawn, carrying an authority born of countless seasons. The men turned, clearly caught off guard. Their eyes widened, and for a moment they looked like a pack of deer frozen in headlights. The tension hung in the air, shimmering like heat over pavement. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scruffy beard and eyes like a stormy sky, stepped forward. We're just doing some exploratory work," he stammered, attempting to bolster his confidence. But Martin could read the lie etched across his face, a flimsy shield against the truth. Martin repeated, his voice low yet resonating with strength, "This is my land, and you have no right to dig here." Laughter erupted from one of the men, short-lived and brittle like the autumn leaves. "Come on, old man, you think you can just scare us off?" His bravado was a hollow mask, disguising the doubt that churned beneath. Martin stood firm, undeterred. "You might think you have strength in numbers, but strength lies in conviction, not chaos. I know this land." The words were like a gust of wind, stripping away illusions and revealing the reality of their situation. The men exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. The fear was palpable, thickening the air, binding them suddenly together, yet pulling them apart. Then they hesitated. Martin felt the moment shift, a pendulum swinging back. The slow-motion tango of confrontation danced before them, and he could sense their resolve begin to crumble. Fear and confusion mingled together like dark clouds gathering for a storm. "Look, it's not worth it," the leader mumbled, looking back over his shoulder toward the tree line as if contemplating retreat. But Martin pressed on, emboldened by the conviction in his heart. "You don't get to decide what harm you've done." He stepped closer, the weight of his presence filling the space between them. And in that moment, Martin's unwavering confidence pierced through the haze, electrifying the air around them. The men glanced at each other, realizing their power was slipping away. The threat hung thick, unyielding, and strong. One of the men asked, the bravado fading from his voice, "Leave them." Martin's voice had deepened, weighted by authority. The men hesitated a moment longer, their rebellious facade crumbling under the onslaught of the truth. Finally, one by one, they collected their things, shovels, picks, and bags, and retreated, marching backward toward the tree line as if they were leaving behind a treasure they couldn't bear to part with. Martin stood his ground as they melted away into the mist, shadows vanishing like ghosts returning to their grave. With each step they took, waves of relief washed over him, freeing him from the anxieties that had twisted in his gut. He watched them go, the echoes of their footsteps fading into the stillness of dawn. As the sun began to spill across the horizon, casting vibrant hues of orange and red, he allowed himself to breathe. His heart still thundered in his chest, yet a sense of peace settled over the land. The sun warmed his skin like a gentle embrace, and the cool morning air fluttered through the trees, whispering secrets he had yet to uncover. Came a soft voice from behind him, pulling him from his revelry. The twins stood there, their wide eyes gleaming with a mixture of admiration and concern. He smiled, a slow grin that curved his lips and lit his eyes. Yes, kids, in that moment he became more than a farmer, he became a protector. As he knelt down to embrace his children, feeling their small arms wrap around him, he knew that this battle was just one of the many storms they would weather together. But today, he had stood tall against those who sought to disrupt their peace. "Let's go see what they were digging up," he said, the hint of adventure flickering in his voice, leading the way back to the scene. Each step was a reminder of resilience, of the lessons learned through life's unpredictable trials. They reached the spot where the men had dug, and the soil lay fresh and disturbed. Curious, the twins bent down to examine the earth. Lucy asked, her eyes scanning the area, glimmering with wonder. Jacob piped up, eyes wide with imagination. Martin chuckled, kneeling beside them, feeling the strength of generations beneath him. But still, the weight of the unknown loomed large. He wouldn't let fear rule his life. He had withstood the tide, fought the darkness, and emerged victorious. With that thought, he felt the earth beneath him, firm and steady. It resonated with a promise. It sang songs of protection, heritage, and all the memories woven through the tapestry of time. Their home would remain theirs, timeless and unyielding. At that moment, he also understood something profound. In life, there would always be those who moved in stealth, who tricked and deceived. They might creep in the shadows or tread lightly in the dawn, but those who stand firm, who don't flinch in the face of adversity, will always emerge victorious. And as the sun climbed higher, illuminating the landscape with fresh hope and unbridled potential, Martin knew that as long as he remained grounded in his love for the land, there would always be room for victory, for resilience, and for home. A thin mist twisted around the trees at dawn, the kind that cloaks the world in secrets and uncertainty. Somewhere in that fog, 5 figures moved, their shadows merging with the earth itself like they were part of a sinister ballet. It was an unusual sight on Martin's farm, this quiet group of men creeping in slow motion. They were up to something, and Martin sensed it. Their slow, deliberate movements told him more than their faces ever could, and their hesitation lay a hidden intent. He stood at the edge of his property, the crisp morning air filling his lungs as he tugged his worn straw hat lower. To anyone else, they might look like laborers ready to harvest or dig. But he had learned to read the signs after years of hard work and heartache, of watching what others would ignore. Martin had fought too many battles over the years against nature, poor soil, and all the pressures that came with farming. But this felt different. Instinct screamed at him to be cautious, to protect his land and everything he had built. The men were not wearing the usual attire of farmers, no worn jeans or plaid shirts. Instead, they came dressed in dark, muted clothes that blended into the shadows. As they approached the old oak tree by the fence line, the tension in the air thickened. Martin's heart raced. Whatever they were hiding in their pathetic disguises, it was targeting the very heart of what he held dear. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through him. Part of him wanted to sprint into action, confront them head-on, make them leave his property. But a wiser thought, slowly settling like morning dew, urged him to observe first. Patience is a virtue learned through the harshest of trials, and it echoed in his mind now. He stood still, muscles coiled like springs, the earth beneath his boots grounding him. The men bent down, shovels digging into the rich soil, their movements almost rehearsed, choreographed. What the heck could they be searching for? Just when Martin believed he might burst from sheer urgency, one of the burly figures grunted loudly, striking something hard beneath the surface. One of them whispered, a nervous tremor in his voice. Curiosity mixed awkwardly with fear. He could see it in their eyes as they exchanged glances, silently weighing the potential consequences of whatever treasure lay below. Martin felt the air shift, fear creeping into the space like a cold shadow. Now was not the time for cowardice. He couldn't allow them to continue while he stood idly by. His home, his sanctuary, was under threat. With newfound resolve, he stepped closer, the grass crunching beneath his boots like thunder in the stillness. He called, his voice steady but firm enough to rattle them. They froze, looking like deer caught in headlights. Suspicion flashed across their faces, their eyes darting back and forth, assessing the situation. Martin continued, his heart racing but his expression resolute. The tallest man, a wiry figure with a crooked grin, stepped forward. We're just doing some digging, exploratory work, he retorted, but Martin could hear the tremor beneath the bravado. The lie hung in the air, feeble and transparent. Exploratory work. This land has been in my family for generations. I know every inch of it. You have no right to be here, Martin replied, each word dripping with conviction. He wasn't about to show fear. He had faced storms far worse than these men. The others shifted uncertainly, glancing at their leader as if searching for strength. Martin's presence loomed over them like a storm cloud, thick and heavy. We didn't mean any trouble, another man stuttered, suddenly small beneath Martin's unwavering gaze. Trouble is exactly what you found, Martin responded, stepping forward until he was dangerously close. Watching their faces play through a range of emotions, fear, anger, incredulity, Martin felt the tide shift in his favor. They had come in with intentions cloaked in darkness, but they had underestimated one simple fact: he wasn't budging. While they moved in slow anticipation, he stood firm, rooted to his land like the ancient oak behind him. The tall man's bravado faltered. We're just looking for something valuable. Martin shook his head, each sway reminding him of ages past where farmers like him had defended their homes against all sorts of villains. I don't care what you're looking for. Palpable silence enveloped them, the tension thick enough to slice with a knife. Each second felt like a century. Behind him, the whispers of the wind seemed to carry the voices of past generations, filling him with a resolve that surged through his veins. This was a fight for more than just land. It was a defense of history, memories, laughter shared at the dinner table, and the sacred bond that tied him to this earth. The leader's confidence shattered like glass, pieces scattering in the realization of their folly. Let's just go, man. This isn't worth it, one of the men muttered, voice shaking. Martin watched as the leader glanced around, weighing options, considering retreat. You're making a mistake. But disappointment echoed in his voice, and Martin could see their hesitance creeping like weeds through cracked concrete. You might find something, but it won't be worth the trouble you're asking for, Martin shot back. Do you really want to test me? As he spoke, the sun began to shift, breaking through clouds that had loomed too long. Light cascaded over the scene, illuminating Martin's scarred hands and weathered face. There was something powerful in that burst of sunlight, a blessing bestowed upon the land he had nurtured and fought for. The men lowered their shovels, realization dawning harshly over them. They had underestimated not just the land, but the spirit of the man who defended it. Slowly, they began to back away. "Forget it, man. Let's just go," one murmured, turning to retreat like a snake shedding its skin. They dropped their tools carelessly, abandoning their mission as they shifted backward into the fog, their departure echoing with whispers of defeat. Once they vanished from sight, Martin let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The weight of an entire generation lifted off his shoulders as he stood alone in the sunlight. The tranquility of the moment washed over him, warming him like the very sun rising in the sky. A soft voice called from behind him, pulling him from his reverie. Turning around, he saw his twins standing there, eyes wide with awe. They had watched the entire exchange, the bravery displayed by their father igniting a sense of admiration in their innocent hearts. Jacob asked, barely managing to mask the concern in his tone. Martin knelt down and pulled them into a close embrace. "Yes, my brave little ones, we did win." As they hugged him tightly, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude fill his heart. It was a victory, true, but not just over the men who'd come to intimidate. It was a victory for all the farmers who had come before him, who had molded him and taught him the essential lessons of strength and humility. Lucy asked, curiosity lighting up her eyes. Martin smiled, standing up again, feeling empowered. "Of course," he replied, leading them back to the spot where the intruders had disturbed the earth. The hole was small, the soil dark and loose from their attempts, but he could still sense the turmoil that had unfolded there. Together, they gathered around, staring into the depths of the earth. Jacob wondered, staring into the dark hole with wide-eyed fascination. "Maybe treasure," Lucy said, her voice filled with the richness of innocent imagination. Martin chuckled, shaking his head. He began to scoop the earth with his hands, a symbolic act of reclaiming what was his, both from the intruders and any fear they may have ignited within him. Digging deeper into the soil, a glimmer caught his eye, a few shiny rocks uncovered in the chaos. He exclaimed, his voice laced with disbelief. "These aren't just any rocks." The twins leaned closer, excitement bubbling over. Lucy asked eagerly, "Yes, they are. But remember, their real value isn't in their shininess. It's a reminder of what we have to protect." They gathered the rocks, their treasures, and turned back toward the farmhouse, the weight of yesterday's moment dissipating like fog in the sunlight. As they walked together, he felt a renewed strength, a bond growing tighter among them. The encounter with the sneaky men would mark a pivotal memory in their lives, a testament to standing firm, not just for oneself, but for the spirit of all that came before. In that harsh sunlight, Martin realized that it was more than land he was defending. It was the legacy he'd passed down, a whisper of strength, of courage, a tale that would echo for generations as they thrived on this earth. Together, they laughed and talked, the warmth of family wrapping around them like a comforting embrace, reassuring him that whatever challenges arose, they would face them together, unbending, resolute, and fierce. This was home, and they would protect it until the end. The morning sun hung low, painting the sky in strokes of orange and gold, but a strange tension hung in the air like a storm cloud just waiting to burst. Martin stood at the edge of his sprawling farm, gazing toward the copse of trees that bordered his land. There, something unusual caught his eye, a group of men moving slowly, stealthily, like shadows creeping across the earth. Each step they took was deliberate, and in that slow, calculated movement, Martin felt an instinctual alarm ringing in his mind. What were they doing? Farmers didn't operate like this, and something about their presence felt like a direct threat. Martin squinted, trying to make out their faces. Unkempt hair, rough clothes, heavy boots that squelched softly as they walked. They moved like thieves lurking in the mist. And here he was, a steadfast farmer, protector of his land, feeling the stirrings of unease churning in his gut. He had seen trouble before, the kind that came barreling in fast, like a storm overwhelming the fields. But this felt like an insidious whisper on the wind, a quiet danger that seeped into the soil beneath his feet. He felt the weight of generations upon his shoulders, the lineage of hardworking men and women who had tilled this land before him and fought for its existence. The men drew closer, their whispers mixing with the rustle of leaves. As they finally reached the edge of his property, they dropped to their knees, shovels digging into the earth, their hands moving rhythmically. Martin's heart raced. What were they looking for? Whatever it was, he had a hunch it wasn't just a couple of rocks. Maybe they were searching for something to take, to exploit. The thought ignited a fire within him. He stepped forward, boots crunching over gravel and dirt, each sound a thunderous proclamation that he was not backing down. "Hey," he called out, his voice steady and authoritative, echoing through the still air. The men froze, their heads snapping up like startled deer. A moment of silence stretched out, thickening the air around them, and Martin took advantage of that moment. One of the men, a stout figure with a scraggly beard, stepped forward, trying to muster bravery. "We're just doing a little digging," Martin echoed incredulously. His words tasted bitter, full of righteous indignation. The man shifted uncomfortably, glancing back at the others in the group. Martin could see uncertainty flickering in their eyes, a crack in their bravado, a hint of fear he was keen to exploit. They had underestimated him, just as so many had done before. "You don't have to be like that, man. We're just looking for some minerals," the leader stammered, desperation creeping into his voice. Martin stepped closer, driven by the need to protect his home and everything he held dear. "You're trespassing." Each word felt sharp as he stood there, feeling the heat of the sun on his back. "You need to leave." A nervous silence settled in, punctuated only by the rustling leaves. Martin stood firm, rooted to the spot, radiating a calm resilience that felt electric. He had spent years battling the elements, drought, floods, pests. He wasn't about to let some sneaky men steal from him, too. Then he heard it, the faint sound of footsteps behind him. He turned his head slightly, scanning the horizon. There stood his two children, Lucy and Jacob, emerging from the farmhouse, eyes wide and innocent. They sensed the tension like a storm brewing, not quite understanding, but feeling every bit of their father's unease. Jacob called out hesitantly, a hint of worry lining his voice. "Stay back, kids," he commanded gently, not wishing to frighten them further. Martin returned his gaze to the men. They were glancing at the children, confusion etched across their faces. But under Martin's watchful eye, that confusion was quickly replaced with hesitation. The presence of his children, vulnerable, innocent, changed everything. It wasn't merely a confrontation about land anymore. It was a father protecting his young against the shadows of greed and violence. "You don't want to mess with him," one of the men muttered, fear creeping into his voice now. They had expected an easy target, but they'd found a lion in the heart of the farmer. Martin boomed, his voice thundering like an approaching storm. The words hung heavy in the morning air, each syllable laced with authority. Martin felt the atmosphere shift. It crackled with the energy of his certainty. Men shifted nervously, glancing at one another, sensing the gravity of their poor choices manifesting before them. One of them made a weak attempt to laugh it off. "We don't want trouble, just looking for minerals or something," he deadpanned with nervous laughter as if trying to deny his own fear. Martin felt his resolve strengthen. He knew this wasn't just about minerals. This was about their very existence, the integrity of his family's legacy. "You'll find nothing here but your own regret." The group hesitated, their bodies tense, eyes searching for an escape. They hadn't come prepared for opposition, especially not from a man like Martin, who stood unwavering, a sentinel guarding the sanctuary of his children. Realizing they were outmatched, the men began to retreat, backing away slowly, bewildered by their sudden shift from aggressors to the hunted. They nodded, understanding that their time was up, and in a sudden, frantic rush, they gathered their tools, awkwardly shoveling dirt back into place as they scrambled to leave. The quiet intensity of the moment felt like a breath held for far too long, and then, with a final glance back, they disappeared into the tree line. Martin exhaled deeply, a whoosh that released a flood of tension built over the past minutes. He turned slowly, feeling the warmth of the sun wash over him, and found Lucy and Jacob standing wide-eyed, full of questions. Lucy asked, her voice a mixture of awe and admiration. "Yeah, I guess I did," he said with a hint of a smile. As the adrenaline faded, he knelt down to their level, his hands resting on their shoulders. "You see, it's important to stand up for what you believe in." Jacob frowned, still digesting what he had seen. Martin glanced back at the disturbed earth, a thousand thoughts swirling through his mind. Sometimes people think they can take what isn't theirs, but we cannot let fear rule us. Martin smiled gently, wrapping his arms around them both, pulling them close. "If they do, we'll be ready." A sense of calm settled between them, anchoring the brief chaos into something they could understand and conquer as a family. In that comforting embrace, they formed an unspoken pact, a guardian alliance of sorts, each member promising to fight back against the darkness that dared to encroach. Jacob asked innocently, his curiosity ignited. "Sure, let's take a look," Martin replied, leading them back to where the men had hurriedly left the hole. He knelt down again, and this time he felt a sense of solidarity with the earth, a connection that had deepened amidst the turmoil. As they peered into the shallow pit, Martin found more than just turned dirt. There was something gleaming beneath the surface rocks that sparkled in the light, catching the twins' attention. Lucy asked with her eyes wide in wonder. These are pretty special, actually," Martin said, brushing some dirt away with his hands to reveal the true beauty hidden beneath. "They're just stones, but they remind us of resilience." He handed a couple of the rocks to Lucy and Jacob, watching as they marveled at their newfound treasures. The shiny bits weren't valuable in the way the men had hoped, but they carried more significance than any mineral ever could. They represented the fight, their family, and the legacy that rested in the soil they cherished. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the world in brilliant colors, Martin felt a sense of victory washing over him. It wasn't just the moment of confrontation. It was the connection forged with his children, the lessons shared, the unwavering spirit of resilience that ran through their veins. Together, they gathered the stones, each one a token of their triumph against adversity, and returned toward the farmhouse. They laughed and talked as they walked, a comforting routine settling back into their day-to-day life. But underneath the surface, Martin knew he had forged a new understanding. He had protected his land, yes, but he had also instilled a deeper wisdom within his children, a realization that standing firm and believing in oneself was as sacred as the land they had fought for. They would face many more challenges together, but as long as they remained united, there was nothing they couldn't withstand. As they entered the farmhouse, Martin paused, glancing back over the fields that stretched endlessly before him. Each furrow, each blade of grass held stories, rich with history and purpose. And as long as he had breath in him, he would fight to preserve not just the soil beneath his feet, but the love that bound them all together, the remarkable journey unfolding like the dawn of a new day. And so, with the treasure of that day still glimmering in his palms, Martin stood tall, unwavering, embodying the heart of a true farmer, a guardian of his land, his family, and the unbreakable spirit that thrived within their hearts. In this world of uncertainty, he remained a beacon of hope, forever ready to face the dawn, stronger together. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in swirling hues of orange and purple, but a different kind of darkness was beginning to creep onto Martin's farm. He stood on his porch, taking in the familiar sounds of evening, the rustling leaves, the distant call of a crow settling in for the night. But the tranquility was pierced by a feeling creeping into his gut. It was that gut instinct that had served him well over the years. Something wasn't right. Turning his gaze toward the tree line, he squinted through the tapestry of shadows and noticed them. A group of men, 5 in total, moving with a slow, deliberate stealth. Each man seemed to blend into the landscape, their dark clothing soaking up the evening light as if trying to become one with the earth itself. There was a palpable tension in the air, a strange balance between danger and calm. As he watched, his muscles tightened. The men were approaching the edge of his property, a place where the ground was fertile and life thrived. Their careful movements reminded him of a predator stalking its prey, and he knew at that moment that trouble was brewing. Martin didn't flinch. He had weathered storms that could scare most people into hiding. As a farmer, he had faced droughts that turned the land to dust, floods that threatened to swallow everything whole, and diseases that had taken livestock from him unexpectedly. But the men lurking in the shadows presented a different kind of threat. They weren't nature, they were human, and that made them unpredictable. His heart raced as he flipped the switch from passivity to resolve. He took a step forward, the old wooden floor creaking beneath his feet, echoing the uncertainty building in the pit of his stomach. The men seemed to catch his movement, their heads snapping in his direction. He felt the weight of their gaze, a mix of curiosity and caution. In that moment, he became the predator, ready to defend what was his. Martin bellowed, his voice booming across the dusk. The men exchanged glances, their hesitance evident. It was apparent he had caught them off guard, but the leader of the group, a tall, scruffy man with wild hair, stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "Just doing some work out here, friend." Martin's brow furrowed. "This is my land." In the increasing darkness, the shadows seemed to thicken around the intruders. They were clearly unprepared for any confrontation, and Martin sensed their tension. He was not just the farmer, he was the guardian of this land, and he would not back down. The leader stammered, "We're just looking for minerals, valuable minerals." The lie hung in the air, thin and desperate as a spider's web. Martin snorted, anger rising in him. With each word, he walked forward, crossing the boundary of his porch and stepping onto the grass, the earth underfoot sturdy and alive. It was a silent assertion of his authority. Just then, a soft creak broke the tense silence as his children emerged from the farmhouse, curiosity etched across their innocent faces. Lucy called, her voice trembling slightly, sensing the tension wrapped around them like a fog. Martin commanded without turning his head, his instincts screaming for their safety. The intruders' eyes darted toward the children, momentarily losing their focus on Martin. He sensed their hesitance grow. For these men, the stakes had shifted. They were no longer dealing with just a man, they were facing a protector, a father willing to stand up to anyone who dared threaten his family. "Listen, sir, we don't want any trouble," the scruffy leader said, forcing a nervous smile. "Not until you explain what you're doing here," Martin pressed, fists tightening at his sides. That's when he saw it, a fleeting glance exchanged between the men, a glimmer of desperation mixed with anger. They were realizing that their strength in numbers meant nothing against the unwavering spirit of a father defending his children. The group was composed of men who moved in slow but sneaky confidence, yet there was nothing sneaky about their desperation as fear began to chip away at their facade. He asked them, his tone firm and unyielding, "Tell me the truth." The leader hesitated, determination melting into uncertainty. "We were told there's value hidden in the land, things we could sell. We thought we could find something valuable here," he admitted, his voice slipping lower. Something flickered in Martin's mind, the lessons he had learned from years of hard labor flooding back. He remembered stories his father had told him about the greed that could poison good men, how easily it could spread like weeds in an untended garden. The thought of these men seeking to profit off the land without understanding its value, its history, its significance sent a chill down his spine. "Let me tell you something," Martin said, stepping closer until he could see their faces clearly, one by one. "This land is worth more than any treasure you think you can dig up. It holds the stories of my family, of generations who have fought to keep it alive." His resolute words seemed to rattle them. The men exchanged uncertain glances again, this time more unsure of themselves. They had come seeking ease, thinking they could dig up riches without consequence, but they faced a man who understood the very heart of the earth they were threatening. Martin continued, the calmness of his voice unwavering. No good will come from what you're doing. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, his words hanging in the air like droplets of rain before a storm. The men were on the brink of making a decision, their faces displaying the internal turmoil swirling within them. The ground beneath them may have felt stable, but their resolve was crumbling. Let's just go, one of the men muttered, breaking the silence. The leader glanced back, still holding on to a flicker of bravado, but it was fading quickly. Yeah, we should go, he muttered, backing away slowly as if retreating from a great beast. Martin felt a surge of triumph, but he also knew that this was a fragile victory. Don't ever come back, he warned, the authority in his voice resonating. One by one they turned, scooping up their shovels and tools, their movements heavy with defeat. They retreated toward the tree line, their slow departure severing the tension that had gripped the evening air. Martin stood tall, allowing himself a breath of relief, but the battle was not over yet. Lucy rushed to him, her little arms wrapping around his waist. He knelt down, pulling her and Jacob into a protective embrace. I know, sweetheart, but you don't need to worry anymore. In that moment, he felt the magnitude of what had just happened, an affirmation of his role as protector, a moment that would resonate through the ages and be woven into the fabric of their family story. He had faced darkness and emerged, not unscathed but victorious. Jacob asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Sure, let's go take a look, he said, guiding them back toward the disturbed earth. As they walked, the sun began to sink lower, casting long shadows across the landscape, illuminating the potential hidden in the soil. When they reached the spot, Martin knelt and carefully brushed aside the loose dirt. Looks like they didn't find anything after all, he said, revealing a few shiny stones layered beneath. Jacob picked up one of the stones, its surface glistening in the last rays of sunlight. Yes, it is, Martin said, a smile breaking across his face. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the sky exploded into vibrant colors, a reminder of the beauty that surrounded them. The battle may have ended for now, but Martin knew this was just one of many trials they would face together. He placed an arm around each child, guiding them back toward the warmth of their home. When we stand tall together, he said softly, there's nothing we can't overcome. That night, as they shared stories over dinner, Martin felt a swell of pride. The fear that had once threatened to seep into their lives had turned into a lesson, a reminder that true treasure isn't found in the soil but in the bonds of family, the courage to stand your ground, and the wisdom to know what truly matters. And so they laughed and shared tales, generating new memories that would fill the pages of their family's history. With each word, with every bite of home-cooked food, the spirit of their existence was woven tighter against the dark, against the unknown, always ready to stand firm, unyielding in the face of any storm. As Martin looked into the eyes of his children, he knew that they were more than just a farmer's legacy. They were the guardians of a story that would echo through the ages, a testament to resilience, bravery, and love. And while the sneaky men may have slunk away into the shadows, the glow of their resolve would forever illuminate the path ahead. The sunset draped a golden veil over Martin's weathered land, igniting shadows that danced along the edges of the field. But as the sun gave way to twilight, an unsettling sight unfolded at the far end of his property, a group of 5 figures moving with an eerie, calculated slowness. At first glance, they looked harmless, maybe even like workers preparing for a late shift. But something about their presence gnawed at Martin's gut, sending ripples of instinctual dread through him. He had spent years cultivating both the soil and his family's legacy on this farm. The earth held the sweat of his brow, the laughter of his children, and the echoes of his ancestors who had tended the land long before him. And now these men appeared sneaky, like thieves creeping under the cover of dusk, each deliberate step whispering trouble. Martin observed, legs anchored to the earth beneath him, the weight of generations heavy upon his shoulders. As a farmer, he had weathered many storms, literal and metaphorical, and he wouldn't let this one roll in unchecked. With a deep breath, he squared his shoulders, the muscles in his arms tightening as he made his decision. It was time to confront the encroachers before they crossed a line. Martin shouted, his voice slicing through the evening air. There was no hesitation, no second guessing, only the raw authority that comes from a heart committed to protecting what it loves. The men froze in their tracks, heads turning as one, like wolves alerted to an unexpected presence. A moment past a heartbeat stretched them before the leader stepped forward, determination mixed with surprise flickering in his eyes. We're just here to do some work, he said, attempting to mask the tremor in his voice with bravado. Work. This is my land, Martin replied, stepping closer, boots crunching softly against the gravel. Each word was deliberate, unyielding as the earth he stood on. A hushed silence settled over the scene, thick and palpable. The men exchanged furtive glances, uncertainty rippling through them like wind through tall grass. Martin watched them, gauging their responses. He saw the flicker of doubt, the realization that they had miscalculated their approach. We're not looking for trouble, one of them blurted, a hint of fear edging his voice. Just exploring, you know. The laugh that erupted from Martin's lips was devoid of humor. Exploring, the incredulity dripped from his tongue. You think I'd let you dig around and hope to find something valuable without consequences? He took another step forward, commanding the scene with the stature of a man who had faced many battles in his life, but never without purpose. The sun dipped lower, sending shadows creeping toward the men like silent phantoms. Martin felt the tension in the air shift, thickening as he read the men's expressions. Their confidence was cracking like the parched soil after a dry summer. He challenged, voice steady, anchored by his conviction. "If you think you can just waltz in here uninvited, you're mistaken." The leader hesitated, eyes darting between Martin and his crew. Whatever camaraderie they had seconds earlier was slipping through their fingers. There was fear now, unfolding slowly like the petals of a flower in darkness. "We just heard there might be something valuable hidden in this area," he admitted, stumbling over his words. Martin wasn't surprised. He knew that whispers traveled fast, and often those whispers came from a place of desperation. Martin repeated, letting his voice roll over the words like thunder rumbling across the sky. With each syllable, he realized he was standing not only for himself, but for every farmer who had struggled to cultivate the land. He saw the flickers of uncertainty in their eyes. They had come looking for treasure, but they had found resilience instead. Martin stood like a sentinel, feeling the fierce loyalty he held for his home emanating from every pore. He shifted slightly, drawing strength from the ground beneath him, allowing every past struggle to feed into his presence. He urged, voice calm but fervent, "You're digging in a graveyard of respect and tradition." Martin's words settled heavily, eliciting a tension that could be felt in the pit of his stomach. They remained fixed in their awkward stances, uncertain about how this confrontation would unfold. Jacob and Lucy stood just behind him, halos of innocence encircling them, and he knew he had to protect that light from the darkness that threatened. "Come on, man, this isn't worth the hassle," one of the men finally muttered, as he began to shuffle back, an act rooted not just in fear, but in an acknowledgement of the battle they weren't prepared to fight. The leader's arrogance waned. "Yeah, let's just go," he said, his bravado unraveling, each word escaping him as though they carried the weight of defeat. He exchanged one last look with his men. They were feeling it now, the realization that they had stepped into a world far beyond their understanding. As they began to retreat, Martin didn't lower his guard. He took an imposing step forward, eyes locked on the men. "If I see any of you again, I won't hesitate to call the authorities. This isn't a game," he warned, his voice steady, infused with a power that resonated through the ground. They stumbled backward, their uncertainty manifesting physically. Once they were a few paces from the edge of his property, they quickly turned to leave, disappearing into the tree line like shadows at sunset. The tension released, and Martin felt the weight lift off his shoulders, exhaling deeply as the threat faded into the night. Lucy rushed forward, her small hands gripping his arm. "You did it." Martin knelt down, pulling both his children into his embrace, a deep sense of relief flooding through him. "I had to protect you, sweetheart," Jacob asked, wide-eyed. Martin gestured broadly, encompassing the stretch of fields, the farmstead, the sky overhead painted with hues of twilight. To them, it was all about greed, things they could take and sell. Lucy looked up, her brow furrowing in thought. "No, not if they know what's good for them," Martin replied. He held a fierceness in his heart as warmth surrounded them, a protective shield against whatever would come next. In a moment of silence, Martin felt the depth of connection growing between them, a family fortified by the experience. He suggested, standing and guiding them back toward where the men had been digging. As they approached the disturbed earth, he focused on the mixture of dirt and stone. He kneeled down, brushing away the scattered remnants, and let out a low whistle when he glimpsed something glinting in the fading light rocks, simple and unassuming, but touched by the glow of sunset as they caught the last of the sun's rays. Jacob asked, leaning in closer. "Sometimes treasure isn't gold or silver," Martin said, holding one up for them to see, its surface sparkling with hidden beauty. "These stones are just a reminder. If you dig into the earth, you'll find beauty even in unexpected places." They picked up the stones together, each one a small token of their victory, symbols of the battle fought that day. They gathered the rocks into a small pile, their laughter echoing against the tranquil backdrop of the setting sun. As they returned to the farmhouse, twilight fell soothingly around them, and Martin felt a deep sense of gratitude. The evening had started with uncertainty, but through the struggle, they had formed a stronger bond, united against the world outside. That night, as they sat around the kitchen table, sharing dinner and stories, Martin realized the vastness of the lesson that had unfolded. The confrontation had illuminated something more profound, a whisper of wisdom echoing through the generations and deep into their souls. Lucy asked, excitement dancing in her eyes. "Of course," he said, his heart swelling with pride. "This is a story about bravery, about standing up for what matters." At that moment, he knew the greatest treasures weren't found buried beneath the ground, they were the lessons passed down through love and resilience. As the stars twinkled outside, Martin felt at peace. The distant call of an owl punctuated the quietness of the night, serving as a reminder that the world still held surprises, be they good or bad. And whatever may come their way, he would stand tall, unmoving as the oak by the fence line. Martin was a protector, a father, and a man who understood the value of not just the land he cultivated, but the family he cherished most. Together, they would face storms and threats, and together they would prevail grounded by love, fueled by courage, and always ready to defend their sacred home. A low-hanging fog cloaked the fields as the sun began its slow ascent, splashing light across the verdant landscape. It was a peaceful morning on Martin's farm, the kind that made you forget the struggles of the world outside. But peace has a way of being disrupted, as Martin was about to discover. From the corner of his eye, he noticed them, a group of 5 figures creeping along the tree line, moving with a stealth that felt off-kilter for the rural setting. They seemed like shadows, draped in muted colors, blending into the backdrop of the thick trees. Their slow movements were deliberate, almost choreographed, and that's when Martin felt a chill run down his spine. They weren't here for a friendly chat. He stared hard, attempting to discern their purpose. Martin had spent years building this farm a sanctuary of hard work and sweat. The thought of someone encroaching on his land ignited a fire in his gut. His hands, calloused from years of toil, clenched into fists as he stood on the porch, watching the men inch closer, undeterred by the quiet mourning that surrounded them. Suddenly, he shifted from observer to actor, his instincts sharpening. With a determined stride, he stepped off the porch, the familiar creak of the wood beneath him shattered by the urgency in his heart. "Hey," he shouted, his voice slicing through the calm like a knife. The men froze, heads snapping towards him in unison, their eyes wide with surprise. In that moment, he saw their uncertainty. They had not expected confrontation. In their hesitance, Martin sensed an opportunity. "You're on my property." The leader of the group, a tall man with scruff lining his jaw, stepped forward, trying to regain composure. "We're just doing some work out here," he said, his voice shaky but attempting to mask his fear. Martin echoed, disbelief flooding his words. "I don't give a damn what you're doing. This is my land, and your sneaking around won't be tolerated." The tension thickened the air as the men exchanged uneasy glances. Martin's heart thundered in his chest, and he could feel adrenaline surging through him. This was a moment that could either cement his resolve or lead to regret. One of the men fidgeted, clutching a shovel in his hands like a lifeline. "Some minerals, valuable minerals," he stammered, trying to sound nonchalant. But Martin saw right through the facade. There was something far more sinister in their intent. Minerals. Martin stepped forward, each footfall heavy with determination. "Believe me, whatever you're searching for, it won't be worth the trouble." The men's bravado diminished with each passing second, their confident grins fading into worried frowns. It was clear now they had underestimated him. For every farmer like Martin, there was a lifetime of grit and determination behind those weathered hands and battle-hardened hearts. The leader hesitated, shifting on his feet, glancing back at his companions. "Come on, man, we didn't mean to intrude." His voice trailed off, lost in the moment. The weight of Martin's scrutiny pressed down on them, palpable and heavy. "You didn't think," he shot back, his tone low and stern. In that moment, the leader's veneer cracked, revealing a glimmer of fear. "Let's just go," one of the other men finally suggested, anxiety coloring his voice. But still, the leader hesitated, unwilling to back down. "We had a tip about minerals," he muttered defiantly, as if trying to convince himself more than Martin. Martin echoed, his voice rising, filling the void with a thunderous authority. He took a step closer, intent on holding his ground. "You'll regret every moment you've wasted here." The fear was now evident on their faces, ripples of uncertainty spreading amongst them. It was a moment suspended in time, like the stillness before a storm. Martin felt their resolve falter. These men had moved in slowly, but now they were eager to retreat, the facade of confidence crumbling under the pressure of reality. "Let's just go, man. We don't need this," one of them muttered, visibly shaken. The leader shot him a glare, the tension between them palpable as they weighed their options. Finally, with resigned shoulders, the leader turned and initiated a retreat, signaling for the others to follow. "We'll leave," he called back, his voice hollow. As they backed away, Martin didn't drop his guard. "If you come back, I won't hesitate to call the authorities," he warned, each word grounded in the truth that had held this land for generations. The men hurried toward the tree line, their confidence evaporated. Martin watched until they vanished, swallowed by the shadows of the trees, and he felt a tension release from his chest. He had faced the threat head-on, and they had backed down. Lucy's voice broke through his thoughts, her small figure appearing behind him, eyes wide with excitement and concern. Martin knelt down, pulling her into a warm embrace. "Yes, I did, but I want you to remember this moment." Jacob chimed in, his curiosity sparkling in the golden light. "Treasure indeed," Martin replied, standing again, glancing at the disturbed earth left behind. As if pulled by a magnetic force, they moved toward the fresh hole the intruders had dug, their tiny feet crunching on the gravel as they approached. Martin could feel the weight of their eyes on him, waiting for a revelation in the twilight. With a deep breath, he knelt beside the disturbed soil, the evening sun casting golden hues over the scene. He brushed his fingers through the dirt, uncovering remnants of what the men had awakened. They hadn't found any shiny minerals, but rather a handful of old stones and bits of bone, fragments of the past buried deep beneath the surface. "Look at this," he said, holding up a piece, the remnants of something long gone. "These are stories. This land has seen so much, and it's our job to protect it and understand its history." Lucy peered closer, fascination lighting up her face. Stories of those who worked hard, who lived here before us. Each piece of earth beneath us is filled with memories. We must honor that, Martin explained, his heart swelling with pride. But as they gathered the shattered remnants, a low rumble disrupted the evening serenity. The distant sound of tires crunching gravel reached their ears. Martin's instincts kicked in, the feeling of dread creeping back. The tree line where the men had disappeared was once again disturbed, and in the fading light, a truck came into view, rumbling onto his property. Heart racing, Martin stood, shielding his children behind him. "Stay close," he murmured, the protective instinct flaring within him. The truck came to a stop, dust swirling in the smoky light. The door swung open, and a figure emerged, tall and rugged, a cigarette dangling from his lips like an unwelcome invitation. He sauntered over, swagger in his step, his eyes locking onto Martin with unapologetic boldness. The man called out, a smirk creeping across his face. Martin swallowed hard, recognizing the figure from earlier. This was their ringleader, and the threat he posed was suddenly real again. Martin asked, his voice steady but edged with tension. "I'm here to make sure we can find what we're looking for," the man replied, stepping closer, his tone almost mocking. "You don't scare that easily, do you? I admire that." "I won't let you take anything," Martin warned, standing tall, shoulders squared, ready to defend everything he held dear. "You can leave now, or I'll call the sheriff." The man laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "You think a couple of cops will stop us?" As Martin gazed into the man's eyes, he felt a sense of foreboding crawl up his spine. There was more at stake here than minerals or hidden treasure. It was a battle for what the land stood for, a fight for history and honor. The tension crackled in the air, and in that moment Martin realized the stakes had just risen. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows that danced along the ground, and he understood instinctively that this confrontation was only the opening round. The farmer's heart raced as he squared his shoulders, feeling the weight of his family's legacy pressing down on him with renewed intensity. He wouldn't flinch. He would stand firm against the tide of greed encroaching upon his sanctuary. But as the figure advanced, confidence radiating from him, Martin knew that the real battle was only just beginning, and he would have to protect everything he held dear, whatever it took. As darkness enveloped the landscape, a new threat loomed just beyond the edge of the field, and the outcome remained uncertain. It was a standoff that would test every ounce of courage in his heart, a challenge that would shape the very fabric of his family's future.